as I see them.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to a special meeting of the Norwich Select Board. This is Wednesday, November 15, 2023. My name is Marcia Calloway. I'm currently serving as chair. I'm joined tonight by, in alphabetical order, Mary Layton, vice chair, Pam Smith, and Priscilla Vincent. I'm assuming that Roger Arnold will join us, and by town manager Brennan Duffy. This meeting is being held via Zoom only, and the agenda and packet materials were distributed via the Norwich listserv, and they're also available on the town website under the Select Board tab. Brennan monitors the admission to our Zoom platform, so please display your full name for admission. As always, everyone can focus or must focus their remarks, speak clearly, specifically, and loudly so that everyone can hear what is being said. For remote public questions and comments through Zoom, please raise your electronic hand to be recognized by the chair before speaking. For questions or comments through the telephone, press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute after being recognized by the chair. I will monitor the Zoom view to acknowledge participants who wish to speak, and we will reach everyone who wants to comment. Remember to direct all comments or questions to the chair, not to other people either on the board or in the remote audience. The order of speaking will generally be Select Board members, then members of the public participating remotely through Zoom. Consistent with our rules of procedure adopted in March of this year, the chair may suggest commenters conclude their remarks within 3 minutes. Public comments for items not on the agenda should be offered, I believe, at 8 p.m. when we're anticipated to finish tonight's budget agenda, which is the only item on the agenda. I remind everyone that we're using a different order of process to address the budget work. We'll begin with the preparatory budget work done by our town manager and finance department, for which we have allotted up to 1.5 hours. At the end of the budget presentation and questions, we will take public comments for items not on the agenda. There are no other agenda items this evening. With that, do we have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
Thank you, Mary. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Priscilla. All in favor? I'm sorry, you have to say aye.
Oh,
I'll call Mary Layton,
yes.
Pam Smith,
Yes.
Priscilla Vincent,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. So that's 4 yes. Thank you. And now for the budget presentation, I turn it over to Brennan and Joyce.
Great. Well, I will just set Joyce up here very quickly. So this is our second meeting to go into fiscal year 25 budget discussion. And Joyce has again put together a very comprehensive slide deck that's going to talk about a little bit about the operational budget pieces that we didn't discuss at the last meeting, and then go back again and kind of do another look at the capital expenses. And that's a significant part of the increases that we're going to see here in this fiscal year. So I guess with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Joyce and she can share her screen. Joyce, she should be a co-host at this point. And I think probably the same protocol where Joyce can kind of work through the slides, and if people have questions, she'll pause at certain points to allow people to ask questions.
Okay, thank you, Brennan. I see there are 2 people waiting to get in. Are you able to see that as well, Brennan, or do I need to let you know that?
Well, I could see them a minute ago, but now I don't. This is a problem with the co-hosting. So we do require a full name. So I think there was one person waiting that just had a single name, first name, and that's not the protocol. Who else do you see there, Joyce?
Roger is the second one.
Yeah, if you can see that and let Roger in. I'm not seeing mine.
I let Roger in.
Okay, thank you. And if anyone else shows up with the full name, please let them in, because as a co-host, I'm not seeing that on my screen now.
Okay, got it. All right. So thank you everybody for joining me. I do want to just let you know I've added a couple slides at the end for questions that came up after I presented the packet. And that's basically dealing with the scenarios that we talked about last week briefly about what if we infused X dollar amount into that. But my goal tonight is to really look at how does the budget, where we stand right now with all the work that the department heads have done, where does that stand with our capital plan that we talked about last week? So my goal is to give you an overview of budget and then give you an insert of how the capital plan that we talked about last year works in conjunction with the budget. And then the next 2 weeks, we're going to look specifically at budgets as the department heads make their presentations. So I'm going to jump to the very last slide where Marcia and I were talking about when I first came in, that for these next 3 meetings, today and the next 2, what I'm really looking for is to make a list of things that you would like presented and or added into the budget pieces. So I know we've talked about capital planning. When we get through tonight, we will have had some basic information about the budget and what is overall showing up there. So if you want me to delve into specific areas, that would be the time to ask me so I can get that presentation ready for the December 6th, I think it is when we have that next meeting. So introduction slide, we were asked to create a budget with an overall increase of 9% or less. And apart from the capital fund allocations discussed last week, we actually did that task. Tonight, we're looking at the data summary sets, very similar to what I presented last year, with some net asset or capital asset spending details from the capital plan infused into that. And then at the end of the presentation, I'm definitely looking for some direction as I get things ready to be presented on, and it's now December 6th instead of November 29th, because that's been bumped out a week. And another way to look at that is if we look at our definition of municipal budgeting, I've got several highlights in this sheet or this slide. What we're really looking for in this presentation tonight is we're looking to see how does the FY25 budget compare with our current period data and how did we arrive at that. We have an actual true life happens incident that was caused Thursday of last week. So I got off the meeting Wednesday night and in my email box Thursday morning came a life happens incident that directly dealt with capital. So I'm going to use that in this presentation to show how that life happening affects the capital plan as a living document. So I'm hoping that I can talk through all of that so we can see how those are woven together with budget and capital planning. So the summary information, these are the numbers that I spouted off last week that some of you wrote down, but some of you probably didn't get written down. So we're looking at the macro budget level and the integration of the capital plan that we did last week. So this budget is based on the hard work completed by the department heads to get us to that budget increase of less than 9%. So the budget is a baseline for the budget requests that are going to come from you folks next week with what if we change this line or what if we change that line or what if we do that. So this is our baseline for that. So obviously 15.84 is where the budget stands right now. And you can see that that was the first number I gave. And I had said the capital allocations are at 6.55% increase. Of the budget increase, 6.4% is related to salaries and benefits. And if I do the difference between those, then that puts us in a 0.14% increase for this budget. And that's taking out the capital allocation. So capital allocation accounts for 9% of that 15% increase. And that's what's shown here in this slide here. The top is just looking at FY25 to FY24. And you can see that that last line in that first picture is the 15.84%. The dollar amount connected with that change, our overall budget change, is $874,000, which is, and are you able to see my little mouse cursor or no?
No.
No, okay. So the total town expenditure dollar amount change is the 874,614. And then I've used throughout the budget this year, I used the same expenditure cost as we did last year, which was $76,000 divided by 100. So that's how I got to the cost of 84 cents for the budget expenditures for this year. The bottom picture is the exact same numbers as presented in the top, only you can look at 23 versus 24. So you can see where we were in FY23, what we ended up with FY24 with that large increase that we had, and where that takes us for FY25. This does not include any infusion. This is just the budget as it stands right now, as it came out of the hands of the department heads. So we'll talk more about these slides when we get toward the end, when I give you some scenarios. This is 2 budget summaries. So this is again showing the town summary data for employee costs and the capital allocations. So for the salary and benefits, which is the top screen there, top picture, they're based on current pay rates and benefit costs, with a COLA increase of 3.84%. When I checked the COLA today, I added in 2 more months, and we're actually at 3.79% as of today. So that will change this a little bit. But when this was created, it was at 3.84. I have 1 more month to add in, but the months are trending down a little bit. So when I'm assuming when November comes out, beginning of December, we're still going to end right around 3.8%. So I don't think it's going to budge a lot from that, but 3.84 is what was used for this calculation and presentation of the budget. You'll notice that the benefits are changed significantly, not only as a whole for the town, but as you look at the individual departments, and that's made up for several things. Number one, we hired a lot of people, so the staff turnover happens, and when people come in, they select their own benefits plans. So those benefits plans that we had budgeted for in FY24 were not necessarily the same cost as what the people selected when they came in for their new plans. We had some benefit cost increases that were included in that. And also the FY24 budget was so much on the fly that I'm sure that there were things that were not correct in the FY24 as it related to benefits. But overall, you can see that the benefits and salary increased 3.41% if we look at townwide. The second picture here, capital allocations. What I did here is attempt to work back to what is our operations budget if I take out all of the capital allocations for the years. So I took the department budgets total, and that's the first line there, total department budget. You can see that that total amount is the total budget that we're sitting at right now compared with FY24. So that's our $874,000 change again, and our 15.84%. So then I took out the capital allocations for 24. I took out the capital allocations for 25, broke out equipment from infrastructure, and you can see the increase is the $542,000. But that nets our budget without the capital allocations at a 6.55% increase. So those were the numbers that I used when I quoted this slide here, when I said the budget increase without the capital allocations is 6.55%. The third bullet of the 6.55%, the 6.41% is related to salaries, netting us with that 0.14% for the increase. So that's where my numbers came from. And then the next few slides, you'll see are the same ones that I presented last year. And there's the salary and benefits sections are broken down into 2 slides. So those I think are kind of self-explanatory. You can see which departments had increased salaries, which were kind of flat, which ones actually had some decreases. And one note here, the listers are flat, and that's because the lister's office I put in the same as FY24. because I did not have directives to change the pay structure for that department. So in my mind, that was a non-budget conversation piece, since the information on the pay structure change was sent directly to the select board. So therefore, I left the listers department for the salary and benefits flat. And this is one of the things that I would like input from you folks as we go through it to the end of the budget period, and looking at that, whether you want to change that pay structure, what do you want to do with that one department? All of the other departments are based on current salaries and that COLA increase of 3.84. And second page, again, is the rest of the department's salaries and benefits only, and that gets us to the total that was on that first head screen. So I'm not going to go through the individuals on those because they're there for you to read. If you have questions, obviously shoot them out at me and I will delve into those answers for you in another presentation. But I don't want to take the time here tonight because I want to leave time at the end for questions. The next group is the group summaries that I created last year with our new figures for this year. And this is grouping the like expenses from each department. So we can see overall, what is the town paying for budgeting for each of these groups of expenses. So example, electric, propane and fuel, telephone, etc. So that's what I attempted to do here. A couple of notes here in fiscal 23 and definitely in 24, we have now redone our petroleum products. So gas and diesel at the pumps that the folks for police department, fire department, highway department all put into their vehicles. So previously, everything was getting dumped into the highway department, and now it's broken out. So the spending is actually going to the departments where it's actually being used. So we've created a new process for that. So I feel like we are better able to track what our actual expenses are by those departments, instead of just putting in a budget number that kind of lumped a huge amount in the highway department that didn't need to be there. So and the same thing with propane. Propane was not expensed to the correct departments. It was kind of all getting lumped into one spot. So that's the explanation there. The other thing on these summaries, you can see that sometimes there's a large percentage, like the generator fuel. It says 100% increase, but we're talking $100. So some of these groups, the dollar amount change is insignificant, even though the percentage change might be significant. So that's why those are both shown there on all of these groups of things. Nothing significant here, no big changes. But I did want to just talk briefly about meetings, education, training by department. So here you can see that we do have some significant increases, but they are all related to the new staff. So we have training in the budget for town manager, the town clerk, finance director, and the zoning and planning director. Other than that, the training has been basically flatlined for those, but all of those new personnel need to be trained for their jobs. And you'll see that individually broken out when we go through the department things. This is a new slide that I created this year because somewhere along my line with budget and questions had asked, well, what about departments? How much is my department? You know, why is my department not getting a fair share or whatever? So I don't know if this will have any meaning, but it's a new summary. It allows us to view into the management by department of the named funds. So it includes all of the funds, regardless of the restriction types. And the change amounts and percentages showed are based on the FY24 and FY25, even though there is a column in these slides for FY23. That was just a marker. And again, it plays into my slides at the end where I'm looking at historical things and future things. So that's just something to have in the coffers. So here again, you can see 532,000, well, 533,000 total of the dollar change when we look at all of the funds together. And then I broke out our non-capital funds, and the next screen is our capital funds. So we can see the changes in the two groups, because here again, we're talking about capital funds connected to that capital plan. So I wanted to give you a presentation of that in the same thing. So you can see that the non-capital funds, we have a 12% increase in the non-capital funds. And you can see which funds have increased and which ones have stayed the same. And then looking at the non-capital funds, exact same screening. Again, you can look at each individual fund. And this was a 52% increase over what it was. And if you look at the dollar amount, you can see there's our $500,000 again, sitting at the bottom line. That's our capital increase as it stands right now for the department requests. And then because when I was creating the budget information or gathering the budget information, I asked all of the department heads to look for other funding streams for their capital expenses. And I also asked them to look at revenue streams when they were creating the budget. So those departments who had revenue streams, I asked them to say, is what's budgeted in there reasonable based on your historic data? So again, we're looking at cutting spending, but if we're looking at cutting spending to have a solid budget, in my opinion, you also have to look at your revenue stream. So that was why I incorporated those two together to try to see where our true cost savings could be. This has been identified as an additional revenue stream that's possible because, as you can see, we are spending or subsidizing of $40,000 to $45,000 a year to keep the transfer station going. There has been questions about that, both positive and negative comments I've heard. So I'm just putting it out. It is an additional revenue stream that would be possible. A word of note, this slide has the years in the opposite order of all the other slides. So the newest, 23, is the first column. The last column to the right is 2020. So just be aware of that.
Joyce, I just wanted to add to that because this has been a topic that's come up a couple times here over the last 6 months or so. And we had promised to kind of look at the transfer station revenue piece and the costs that were associated. So thank you for being able to put this together. I think this was actually Barry's work of kind of tracking all of this down. I don't know that this is something we need to debate and discuss, right now, but I think this was part of the proposed discussion about where are we actually in the transfer station. And I believe historically there has been an interest in subsidizing that to some level. So again, this might just be interesting information for the select board as to what level that actually is.
Right. And what I also wanted to say with that, we in the finance department had several requests for this information that had come up. So Barry did get this pulled together so that we could have an answer for that. However, couple that with what is the timing for turning that? Not only is it a conversation that needs to be had because what level of subsidization do you want to do, but it's not a quick turnaround. So there's not a way that this could be, in my opinion, incorporated into the FY25 budget. But I'm just identifying it here as a possible revenue stream to consider for future years. So if we're talking about what are we doing for infusions of the surplus in future years, is this also a way that we can look at that? So there's a lot of pieces that would go into that piece of the pie. So as Brennan said, it's out there to think about, but it's not going to play into the FY25 budget just because we don't have the time to do all the work that would be required to put in a new pricing structure, fee structure, or whatever by it would be June or July 1st of next year. We just wouldn't have the time to do that. So for future years, there you are. Okay, next is our Life Happens incident. So as I said at the very beginning, I got this email from Chris. It says, we've got truck repairs I just done. And I know prior conversations with Chris, he was welding the welds to keep some of the information or the vehicles going. So This truck, number 8, he actually had in the capital plan to be replaced in FY 26. But as he says here, he really needs to get it replaced in FY 25 because the bed is hardly capable of supporting the load. So that means the truck is not able to do its job. So I used this life incident to kind of give you, here's how our capital plan works. So the truck that Chris is talking about is the one that's highlighted toward the bottom in red. You can see that's a 2012 Freightliner. He had $50,000 budgeted in FY 25, and that would be for the deposit because to get this vehicle, we do have to order it 9 months ahead. And then we have to give a deposit with that order. So this was Chris's estimate that his deposit would have been $50,000, and the price that we had back in April, I think it was, he had a quote, would have given us a full value of $230,000. So $50,000 deposit plus $180,000 that we pay when the truck is actually delivered in 2026. So that's how it sits in the capital plan. When I got Chris's email, I thought, okay, let's use it as an example. So what happens to my capital plan? So the next screen, this is after I updated the capital plan. So you can see the same red highlighted font item, 50,000 as the deposit is now moved to 2024. And I have upped the purchase price, the remaining purchase price in 2025 to $200,000. And that's because we know that we have expenses that we incurred now to repair the truck that have already been spent. We probably will have more repairs that have to be done before we can get that new truck sometime in 2025, which is a whole year down the road. Plus, the quote that Chris just got has an increase of $7,000 in the price to purchase the truck. So the $230,000 that we had in there before didn't cover the whole price of the truck. So that is an estimate of where we think we're going to be now for that. And you can see if you look at the second yellow, well, the first yellow row from the top where it says the estimated fund balance on June 30th, 2024, it's now going to be at $20,000. 2025 is going to be at $70,000. That's if we infuse or put $250,000 in for the allocation in 2025. If we do not put the $250,000 in there, then we don't have the money to purchase the truck, as shown right in here. Therefore, Chris cannot order the truck. So we're looking at what are we doing in fiscal 24 that's going to affect our fiscal 25 budget. If we don't purchase it now, then everything gets moved out, and or the repair costs have to go up, and or a purchase cost is going to have to go up. So that was just a sample. So, and again, I don't want to dwell on that because that's just one item, but I just wanted to show interworking of how last week's presentation goes with this week's presentation. Okay, so now more forecasts for the capital spending. And this is where I wanted to spend a lot of my time because we need to get a good picture of how we're going to integrate the capital plan or capital spending forecast, whatever you want to call it, into our current budget for fiscal 25. So the snapshots represent the capital assets to be replaced in FY 24 and 25. Somebody last week said, well, what assets are we purchasing? I want to see what we've got in there. So this is an answer to that question. And this is a snapshots that are taken right out of the capital spending plan. So you can see what items are earmarked and what those balances are, what the allocations are, and et cetera. So the department heads, when they present, can answer more questions on this, but this is to give you a chance to see what those assets are that they're asking for. Each fund is, and asset within the fund is identified by the tag, and Those are tags, again, are what's set up in NEMRIC as that asset. So that's how that tag is. We could have a whole nother conversation about that, but this is just how it stands right now in NEMRIC. Department managers' comments are abbreviated. So when we get to actually looking at the nitty-gritty details, if you want to see the whole paragraphs that some of the items have in there, that is available in the plan, and I can show that to you. But again, here as an overview, macro view of this, I didn't think that that was the place for that, but certainly next week I will have that available as we start talking about DPW, the fire department, and the police department. Costs are based on known data, but we know costs will vary, and we just had evidence of that in that one example that I just gave you. In the dollar amounts in each of these are placed when the funds are expected to be expended. So that's why instead of having that truck cost all in 1 year, we have to expend it in the year that it's done, in order to know what the balances are and the ending balances. And it's not just that one truck that Chris needs to order. Most of these large capital items for vehicles need to have a year's worth of lead time, so that deposit goes out a year before that vehicle comes. So we're trying to take that into account as we figure those fund balances. So then, again, I won't go through all the details on this, but certainly if you are looking for information on a particular item, put that in the list of questions and I will gather that information for you to be presented when you need that, or when we present that. And I broke out the infrastructure separate. So there's 2 slides for infrastructure. This is the paving and the bridges. And so you can see Chris has it broken out as we're going to do this section of this road to do this job. So it's very specific as far as what he's got broken out to know what those costs are. And then the other infrastructure slide is the 2 new capital funds that Chris is requesting that we set up. And this culvert one is where you can see the FEMA money is represented, and that's in the red highlights there. Wiley Hill Culvert, Union Village, Northfield, et cetera, et cetera. And you can also see that this slide is the one where the FEMA and state grants are listed up there in the gold section at the top. So those are offsetting. But you can see we are at a negative balance in that fund, even with adding the FEMA money and the grants into that. So something is going to have to get moved. But that's kind of the breakdown of that. And that was all part of the short-term funding. So we were just looking at fiscal 24. What are we looking for this budget? And then this second set of this part of the presentation, I'm trying to look at a longer-term look of things. So the first one is grant funding. In grant funding, I am only able to put that in at 5 years, or chose to put it in at 5 years, just because the grant funding is just so variable. None of us felt comfortable with forecasting what grants we might get longer than 5 years. 5 years was kind of a push. State grants, those come pretty consistently. So those we can kind of track a little further, but all the other grants are kind of, sometimes they're available, sometimes they're not available. Sometimes you get them, sometimes you don't get them. But and then the highlight of this one is obviously the FEMA grant that we're looking at. Balances are all based here, the fund balances are based on the replacement schedule established by the department heads that were managing the equipment and the corresponding fund. So this is a replacement schedule they feel is what's needed to help curtail the downtime, reduce the unexpected cost, and to get the assets on a reasonable expected life for them. And just a note on expected life for the equipment. We have a lot of equipment that the expected life that is booked in the system does not match with when that vehicle expires and dies on the road, so to speak. So when we were doing the capital planning, I was asking the department heads to think about what is the reasonable life expectancy for this vehicle to be driving in Vermont for the work that it does. If it's 10 years, that's great. If it's 20 years, that's great. But if it's 5 years and we have it a life expectancy for 10 years, that's defeating the purpose of maintaining our fleet. So the capital spending plan kind of incorporates that expected life that is reasonable for that piece of equipment, which they're not all the same, obviously. So the other thing that I'll point out at the bottom of this slide, you can see our total fund balances are in the line that's got a black border around it, top and bottom. But I also put the total allocations in here. So we can see that the allocations, other than this year, are pretty flat. And what that does when you compare the flat allocations to the fund balances and the expenditures that we expect to have. So if you look at the allocation averages, it's actually $899,705 each year for years 26 through 35. And I'll circle back to that when we get to the end as well, because that's another point that I want to bring out. And then here's just, again, the breakout of the allocations by fund. And this is basically the same thing that I showed you last week, these two slides. So, all right. Next thing, things to consider. And here's where I did some more number crunching this morning for questions that Brennan had after I posted the slides. So I'm going to show some slides on the screen that you do not have in your packet as I talk through this section here. So first of all, the first bullet, department heads have done the hard work, created the flat budget. We talked about that. So the operations budget increase is at 0.14%. The salary and benefits is at 6.41%. And the capital allocations were at 9 point something. I forget what that number is off the top of my head. So the reason I'm spending more time tonight on the capital allocations is because the flat budget, it has already been taken care of by the department head. So I'm feeling that that may not be where we're going to find a lot of savings. I think that the most savings that we're going to be able to find is figuring out what we're going to do with these capital allocations. How much do we want to do with that? Because they presented their capital needs in order to get the fund balances to a point where they can schedule equipment replacements in fiscal 25 and going out. So we're at the hard conundrum, right? We're supposed to have a budget of less than 6%, but our capital needs are pushing us over that, not the non-capital needs. So that brings me to bullet number 4. It's our recommendation that the select board bring before the voters an article to use a sum, and I'm going to give you some scenarios for what this sum could be, of surplus money to buy down the FY25 capital fund allocation increases rather than cut these equipment spending lines and on those allocations. And then the last bullet here, if we use surplus money in the FY25 budget season, what is the plan to fund future allocations? So it's these last 2 bullets that I have some extra slides for you that I'm going to present here. So first of all, calculations for a sum. And I'm going to jump to the picture at the bottom to explain what we're looking at. So you can see I've got a big pink box at the bottom that I have now put in the bottom of my budget workbook, this calculation. So I can look at my budget workbook when I show that to you and we're doing live changes. I can say, okay, if we infuse $750,000 or if we infuse $100,000, what does that do for our bottom line budget? So that is a piece that's now part of our budget. So you can see that if we infuse in the 25 budget $500,000, that drops our budget increase down to 6.78%. And that's what's shown on the bottom number here. And it brings our total expense dollar change to $374,614. 3-year average, and that would be 23, 24, and 25, would be $371,958. And the overall budget increase is 6.78, which is close to what the salary and benefits increase of 6.41 is. So again, it would give us a relatively flat budget over the things which we have some control over. And by that, I mean, we can't control the salaries or the benefits because those are what we have to pay people. So there's very little wiggle room there. So that's why I've kind of taken them out of the picture. So this is scenario number 1. So if we were to use as our sum $500,000, this is what it looks like. So then I thought, all right, that gets us pretty close. But what if we went back and we had an increase the same as what we had in 23, or we had an increase greater than that? What does that look like? So I did a couple more calculations. The first one here, you can see we're looking at if we use $300,000 as our sum to infuse, then the change is about the same as the FY24 change of $574,614 versus $563,253. 3-year average increase would have been $438,000. And the budget increase overall is at 10%, which is over our 9%. So that's a 1.5 too high. And then if we use a larger infusion, $700,000 is the third scenario here, then that would, you can see we're looking at close to the same as what FY23 was versus 174.6 versus 178. Average for those 3 years would be 305,292. Overall budget increase approximately 3.16%. So that's well below our 9%. So the happy medium, in my opinion, was the $500,000. So that's where we came about that. And then I thought, okay, if we're going to take our surplus, number 1, what is the surplus? And number 2, what does that look like if we were going to try to spread that out? Because that was a question that somebody had brought up last week in the meeting as well. So I did a little bit of work on that as well. So if we use future surplus in the money, some things to consider. If we use the money in FY25 budget season, what commitment of funds do we want to use in the plan? If we are using deficit or surplus money, the balances do change every year based on the town's bottom line. So what we have for surplus today might not be what we have for surplus at the end of fiscal 24. So we have to consider that when we figure out how much money we want to use of the spending. At the end of fiscal 23, the unaudited surplus fund balance from NEMWRK is estimated to be 1.8. We are still on the tail ends of the fiscal 23 audit. So I can't say for sure this is where we're going to land, but you can see we're at 1.8. The bottom right-hand corner of this screen is where we stand right now. And that means the current year is $1,072,000 is what we had for current year activity. $738,000 was what we had for prior year fund balance in that deficit surplus account. So then I took that number and I said, okay, if I think that we're talking about the $1 million that we're looking to expend over a period of time, what might that look like? So I just put one scenario here because here again, I have no idea what people are thinking along this. I know that I've heard enough conversations from people that we could have spent the surplus, the $1 million surplus 3 times over if everybody had what they wanted to spend. So there's a lot of talk about that. So I didn't spend a lot of time spinning my wheels to come up with numbers that don't make any sense. So here again, I'm looking for directives from the select board as far as what would you like me to do scenarios for. So here's the scenario that if we were to use the $1 million which was the FY 24 or 23 rather estimate. And we infused $500,000 in FY 25 and even infusions 26 through 28. This is what it looks like. So the infusion amount is subtracted from the original fund balance, the surplus amount. And that's what's in the second column on that first picture. So you can see 1,072,000 minus 500 leaves us 572,000, et cetera, down for those other rows. The allocation that is in the capital plan right now is the third column. So that's what you can see the allocation ask is. And so if I took that allocation and I subtracted off what we're infusing, that gives us the discounted amount. So then I thought, okay, what does that translate to? If we do nothing with this, what does that translate to? And that takes us back to the conversation I had before. If we reduced it by $500,000, oh, I had that number there somewhere. I'll have to find out again what that percentage was. I'll find that for you before we're done, but look for that while you're asking questions. So the one note though, we're looking at buying down the budget, which is going to make us have a less tax rate. However, it does not do anything to infuse money into the negative fund balances resulting from prior year shortfalls. So that's what this bottom screen is kind of trying to show you. I went back to the previous screen that I had that said, okay, here was my capital fund balances from 2025 through 2030. And you can see in 2029, if things were purchased according to the schedule that the department heads are saying, this is what I need for the replacement of this item, we're going to be in the hole in 2029, which means we don't buy those things. And again, this is with those allocations that are flat, basically $899,000 a year for those allocations. That was a scenario. So here, this is a lot of talking point here because I can do lots of things with these different numbers, but I just don't know where to go with it and what direction you guys would like me to take it to present information for you. So just the last slide is the last one you had in your packet. Next week, Brennan and I met with department heads for Department of Public Works, Police Department, and Fire Department today. So I'm working on their slides to be presented next week, which will give you operating budget line items and capital expenses. They will be there to discuss their needs and answer your questions for those. The 29th, we're going to do the same thing with the remaining department heads as needed to present their pieces. And then what I'm looking for is I'm looking for information tonight and the next 2 weeks for those department head meetings to take away questions and research that I can do to answer your questions so that when I present that live moving document on the 6th, we can see in real time what those are. So if I have to put into that document other calculations, I'd like the time to be able to prepare those so that as we move on the fly at that meeting, I can present that information to you. And so I'm going to turn it back to Brennan and Marcia. And what would you like me to go with for next and answer questions?
Marcia, you're muted.
Brennan, do you have more that you wanted to add?
No, just if we go back to that last slide again, just so people are aware of kind of what we had determined. We had initially, I think, so we were going to try to get all of the department heads in on the 21st. And in thinking about the logistics of that, it just didn't make sense. So what we did here is to take what we think are probably the three most complex based on the needs and the expenses. And that would be DPW, fire, and the police. And give each of them, roughly 20-25 minutes of this hour-and-a-half budget discussion, and allow them to again kind of present why they feel the budgeting is needed and required. Allow people to ask questions if they have any about the timing or the needs. The 29th, as Joyce mentioned, we'll have kind of a catch-all for all of the other departments. Some of them are going to be very straightforward, and I think, 5-minute discussions, and some might take a little bit more than that. But we're hoping to be able to get through both of those where you'll actually hear from the department heads and be able to have some interaction there and discussion. And then, again, as Joyce said, on the 6th, we're hoping to take everything that's come out of these prior meetings and be able to present a draft budget, where Joyce will be able to manipulate things as needed, and we can talk through where we want to be, with the expectation that December 13th is still our final budget meeting of the season. We're going to hopefully be able to ratify the budget that's going to go before the voters in March at that meeting. So again, I think maybe it is tweaked a little bit from what we talked about at the last week's meeting, but I think that does justice to everybody and gives people enough time to properly present, and gives the select board enough time to digest that and ask questions.
Okay, good. All right, so select board members, do you have questions? Trying to see everything.
Can we ask Joyce to unshare her screen?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll be able to see everybody then. Good. All right, who would like to start? Mary?
Yeah, I will need a little more time for the idea of infusions of cash to be clear as far as the amounts that are needed to adequately fund our capital needs. I was a little bit sort of pleased but shocked to see the scenario. It seems like we need $1 million this year and 800,000 a year going forward to adequately fund capital, if I understand this correctly. And I'm just not sure when we're talking infusions, what exactly that means. I mean, I think that we possibly have some surplus funds because of the the federal funds that came in and the way that we paid for salaries. So we have kind of a bump. And there's always, it seems like there is always a certain amount that is a surplus. Also, how do we structure this if we're talking about a surplus? Shouldn't the voters have to vote on how that surplus is used? So I'm still sorting all this out in my mind. Maybe others have a better handle on it, but I'm still a little confused.
Roger?
Sure. Thank you for this, Joyce, and thanks for last week as well. I watched it, or I listened to it. It was like a podcast. Can you allow me to compliment some of the things, if that's okay? So, like, one, I love seeing evidence of like a database in use, right? So NEMRIC, such as it is, but nonetheless, you're gathering and verifying, capital assets, right, against a database versus like facts on the ground. And so I think that work has always been done to a certain extent, but like now that we're grounded in the system that we have, even though it's obviously a little deficient, I think it's great to see evidence of that work. I also think it's great to be forecasting grants on a 5-year scale while also thinking about capital at 20-year. Like, that makes good sense to me. I want to know more about a replacement schedule. When we say, I think the quote was, expected life that is reasonable, I want to know more. I trust department heads to have a sense of expertise on that, but they need to reveal more information about their expertise. How do they know what it is that they know? So that might be something for them to emphasize in their presentations, but like, I don't take that on face value, especially since we've had replacement schedules change whoever is in the seat, and I don't want that. So I want more information. I like the idea of an infusion amount. I think we should begin to make plans as a town to use our surplus. And the more we talk about it, the more we can prove to our community that we're thoughtful and responsible with it, right? As Mary indicated, we would have to ask them every year. And so we would have to, that would be a lot to there would be a lot that would have to happen at town meeting to explain to voters every year that we're not just diving into some kinds of coffers, but this is part of a planned process from a surplus that is in part a result of federal funding, right? So we would think, just as a general note for all of us, like if we should build in that infusion cash beyond fiscal years, and I would like the scenarios, we should talk about that. But I think it has to be, all the planning we do is still dependent on the voters every year to do that, right? So like that's like a very particular way to plan capital or spending. The one, what else was I going to say? I had one other thing. I think also just, I think the biggest point, and this is a question for Brennan, you know, I think there would be plenty of people, the example of the car, for example, the truck, I think there'd be plenty of people who would say like, good riddance truck, you were fossil fuel, like you're gone to us. We have reduced our greenhouse gas emissions, right? So similarly, you know, where is that truck being stored? Is it being stored in a dry and safe place? This capital budget planning lacks any planning for the TBW garage and Tracy Hall. And it doesn't have any strategic visioning around things like climate and, you know, values, right? You know, funding a tennis court in, you know, in this world right now is a very value-laden statement. And $75,000 to get us off our dependency of fossil fuels might be more a part of the town's values, or else maybe we could have a conversation about how tennis is like a worthwhile recreational programmatic output. Maybe it brings in revenue. Maybe the trees have grown under it and it should be decommissioned to a basketball court. I don't know. So like we need to be having conversations around strategy. I don't want to buy cars if they're going to like languish in a parking lot and get wet and rusted. I don't want to spend money on tennis courts if our community doesn't value tennis anymore. So like I turn to Brennan and say like, what is the prioritization within this? Like, what is the method to do that work other than 2 more meetings between now and budget season? But anyway, I said enough. And so thank you, Joyce. This is only the second time that I've been a part of a budget presentation with any coherency. So kudos. Thank you so much.
I have some comments, but I'll defer first to Pam and Priscilla. Pam. You're on mute.
Sorry. I'm also struggling with a little congestion, sorry. My concern is that we told the residents of Norwich that we would come to them with public meetings about what we plan to do with this surplus created by the ARPA infusion. And we have not scheduled anything for that. And now we're talking about taking some of that money and putting it into the capital planning. We don't know what it's going to cost to take care of Tracy Hall. So I'm just not really in favor of taking any of this money and putting it into capital assets until we have a much larger plan for Tracy Hall and some of the other things that are coming down the pike. And I agree with Roger, you know, we need a prioritization of these capital assets that people are asking for. You know, I would put tennis courts near the bottom. On the truck number 8, can we just buy a new dump body for it and keep it going for a while? It only has 81,000 miles. You know, there are a lot of things that I think we should be looking at in terms of being pretty frugal. And so I would like to see our Tracy Hall plan and a meeting with the residents on how they feel that we should be using this $1.8 million and before we put it into infusing money into reserve funds. Thank you.
Priscilla?
I have a lot of things concerning me. I mean, again, thank you to Joyce, and I appreciate the very helpful comments that Mary and Roger and Pam have made. And I'm sort of feeling I'm gonna repeat some of that. I mean, I am worried about getting consent from the voters about how we spend the surplus. I'm worried about whatever the Tracy Hall bill is gonna be, and, we had a little bit of at least written discussion of our budget priorities that we probably really need a shed, at least for the DPW, to have a roof over some of our equipment there. There are some people in town who are constantly saying to me, "Well, when are we gonna get a Beaver Meadow sidewalk?" I think we need to do a massive education outreach somehow to the voters to have them understand, there are things we love, and I'm not even getting into like, bicycle corridor on Route 5, but things that people think they would really like to have without maybe understanding that there's some things that are not sexy, not terribly visible, really need to be done. I don't know where all this money is going to come from, and I know I'm not the only. I mean, I think every one of us here is concerned about the effect on the tax bills that we're going to have, and I also get the sense that maybe we're trying to make up for past deficiencies in budget planning and funding, and if we're having to make up for that, that's again, that would be a voter education thing, but it's a tough sell too. But I think we really got to talk to voters a lot about expressing our concern for their tax bills and saying, we have some needs. It's like, if we don't have a snowplow, we need a snowplow kind of thing. And getting them somehow, I don't know how many people are tuning into this, but they need to know that we have all these issues and we just can't do everything at once. And yet, all the things that I've seen so far, that Joyce has put in here for capital needs, they look like, kind of essential. So it's going to be very hard to sort that out. That's not helpful. I'm sorry. That's just where my brain's going right now.
Good thoughts. I have two little questions and then I've got three ideas. For slide 11, I'm just curious, it looked like we had a $27,000 drop in how much we spent on petrol. And I'm just wondering, gosh, how did we do that?
Yeah.
So Joyce can answer this too, but I think the answer to that is in the rush of the fiscal year 24 budget. I think there were assumptions made, and I think probably just an error in an estimate of how much we were going to need and how much our actual costs were.
Okay.
Joyce, do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, and we were basing it on prior year's expenses, and the expenses were budgeted in the other departments and in DPW. So if we truly did what DPW was spending, that's what brought that down.
Okay.
But might it also have been because we contracted out snow plowing last year, so we weren't paying those fuel costs?
And
we're gonna.
That would be a question for Chris, because I'm not sure on that, but I know that part of it is because we honed in that process to make it more specific, to make sure that each department was being expensed for their vehicles. But that would be a great question for Chris, and I'll write that down for Chris, who's presenting next week.
Okay. Thank you. And then in the funds, I'm trying to remember, do you remember when we voted as a town? Roger, you'll remember the name of this fund. It was voted and it was called a performance something or other. And it was so that we could do more investigation. $50,000 I think was budgeted for sidewalks or whatever. Where did that one go? I'm having trouble finding it.
Yeah, so Joyce, in general, like I haven't seen any mentioning of like funds like that fund, but then also like the affordable housing fund, also funds like the climate emergency fund. So maybe
those are on slide 15.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
There.
So there is currently no allocation in the current budget for those funds. The operational performance fund is number 51. So slide 15, that's the next to bottom one. Climate emergency, is in there also. Yeah, so I think that they're all in that list on slide 15.
Okay, what confused me was that I couldn't see any money in the fund, but that doesn't mean there isn't any money in the fund.
This is not balances in those funds, it's the allocation of those funds.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So with the understanding that surpluses must go back to the voters, we can't just hang on to them, right? And we've got a substantial surplus, which last year we didn't have the audit at the time we were trying to do this. And so we weren't entirely sure what it was. We now have a much better idea what the surplus is. And it seems like that surplus exceeds the ARPA money by maybe $700,000, something in that neighborhood. I'll call it the former ARPA money because it's been used. And so I'm wondering maybe what we could do, because all of this is, you know, postulate. What will we think about? If we did an infusion of 500 or 700,000, maybe, to take the surplus and say to the voters, would you like to take 700,000 of our surplus and pay down so that we can, seems to me, basically keep the lights on. We're not doing anything here about really planning for the future necessarily. And then take that former ARPA money, and would you voters like to create a reserve fund for the former ARPA money, which would be used for infrastructure? And to be defined as, you know, we'll all sit down and have public meetings to say, do we want it to be partially used for the DPW, for a new building to protect the expensive equipment that we're buying or trying to maintain? Do we want to use part of it on Tracy Hall? Basically leave it open-ended so that we have returned the money to the voters and asked them to vote it into paying down what we have to keep the lights on, $700,000, and then the extra 1 million into a reserve fund that we will then sit down or open up discussion in town to talk about how we want to spend it. And that would be giving us time to get information back from the architects so we can find out more about what we need for Tracy Hall, and doesn't push us, but it also, I hope, ticks all the boxes.
So if I may, a couple thoughts there. One, we have to, I think your warning from Joyce is to not use the term ARPA funds at this point. So they are surplus funds from fiscal year 23.
Thank you.
You know, one of the preclusions of the ARPA was creating reserve funds with them.
But that's why I said it's former. I don't know what to call it now, but people in town insist on saying, where's the ARPA money?
Yeah.
Well, the ARPA money has been used, but we have a surplus.
Yeah, our surplus is available, and I agree that if we're going to utilize that, it has to go to the voters and allow them to kind of decide how that could be done. So one of the other thoughts we had, Joyce and I and Barry had talked about this earlier in the week, was we could also look out at multiple years of this infusion, right? And that could be a question that could go onto a ballot. So we're not just saying, here, we're taking care of fiscal year 25, and every year we need to come back and hope that we have the same, you know, like-minded select board and that the voters are willing to move forward on this again. And that might look out at a couple years of using that surplus so that we have kind of a more consistent plan going forward. So that's another thought. You know, that I think would be allowing the voters to make a determination of how that surplus is used to some extent. And then, you know, our hope there would be that we would still have a meaningful amount that could possibly be targeted for a special project. And obviously Tracy Hall, when we've completed the analysis there and we have a little better handle on what could be done and what the community would like to see, that's a project. You know, there's certainly many, you know, needs or wants out there in the community that could be discussed. But I think, if we are going to sustain that kind of recapitalization of this budget and know that we are going to not have this dreaded, drop off in 3 years where suddenly we don't have enough money to buy anything as far as capital equipment, and we know we're going to have the needs for that. Looking out more than just one fiscal year at a time and even asking voters to consider that might be a wise choice as well.
Mary?
Just wondering about Brennan's logic. Can we ask the voters to approve money for something beyond the fiscal year without creating a reserve fund to do that? I don't think so.
We might have to think of how that could be structured, but I think the intention there would be that we are, allocating funds out more than 1 year at a time for the purpose of keeping that budget stable and keeping the tax rates down for multiple years, as opposed to having to do this every year and say, oh geez, what are we going to do now? Or having a change in policy there where suddenly we're not making up that underage again. We're back to cutting that out.
I think that, to me, the capital plan is the intention to fund adequately, but I think you have to do it through the reserve fund process. So it still might be adhered to if people understand the implications of not doing it. But I think you're still kind of stuck with, asking for adequate amounts and being able to ask for those amounts over time. I think every year you have to come back and say, well, look, here's our capital plan. We've planned it out carefully. We've gone 10 years ahead to see what our needs are. But I think you'd have to do that kind of education every year rather than just say, well, okay, we're going to fund it 5 years ahead, unless you're putting it in a reserve fund for that.
Well, that was Marcia's suggestion, I think, which makes sense as well.
Yeah. Okay.
I think of it as storage but it's approved voter storage.
Well, it's an investment. You can also just say, let it all fall apart and then borrow money to replace it or something. And that's terrible. I think the town's always been pretty prudent about the idea of reserve funds, even though they may not adequately have funded them at times. So I think it is a good strategy for the town. I was kind of shocked at the need. I think it was good to have this analysis. And I was also thinking about, if you had to get rid of most of your investment in town, I think roads would be possibly ground zero for what you had to invest in. People have to get to work. They have to get to school. I think that's a primary focus personally.
Yeah.
Well, and the equipment to keep the roads safe and
All of that,
manageable.
yes. That's what I'm talking about, keeping those roads in shape so that people can get back and forth. I think it's kind of primal. There might be, other departments are important too, but I think it should be a priority, I think.
Pam, I'll get to you in a second, but I just want to shout out to Matt Sweat and to anybody who doesn't know, but today I happened to arrive when our whole fleet was there at the intersection of the exit to the interstate, and it really looked impressive, and you guys were doing a great job. So kudos to you. Pam.
I think Matt wanted to say something. I'll defer to Matt.
No, I just wanted to say thank you. And if I can say thank you to Brennan, thank you to Joyce. I'm actually, honestly, I'm sorry that I came late to this because I had another Zoom meeting, but the past 2 meetings have been really important and also pretty amazing to see a lot of working together to kind of tackle probably what I consider the capital funding is one of the most important problems to tackle right now. And we have an incredible opportunity that it's given to us because of the 2023 surplus. I wish more people were kind of on this Zoom and had attended the last meeting for Joyce's presentation live, because like this is your select board legacy to the future of Norwich in what you kind of choose to do with this, with the 2023 surplus and the other, actual surplus. And this you have the opportunity to kind of reset a lot of stuff that we've gotten behind on. And I just want to thank you for really approaching this in a really, I don't know, thoughtful way. I wish more people were seeing this.
Me too.
And I agree with whoever said it, Priscilla. This is like a kind of a public information head scratcher too, because you want to make sure that people understand what's going on and not just kind of spring it on them. But
Thank
it's
you.
possible.
Pam?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on you're saying that the 700,000 would be to keep the lights on. As I understand this request, it's money to put infusions into the capital planning for some of the capital assets that our department heads say that they're going to need over the coming years. So it wouldn't really be the right way to present it to say it's to keep the lights on. It's to keep buying trucks and fire trucks and tractors and whatever, police vehicles, whatever we need. And so that would be the ask that we would put before the voters, not do you want to keep the lights on?
Well,
Again, I go back to, before we spend any of this money, I'd like to know what's it going to cost to rehab Tracy Hall. And I'd also like to know what the ask is at DPW for an equipment shed or whatever. What kind of numbers are we talking there? Because I think we need to look at that. And if we're going out and bonding some of these things, what does that add to the budget? It's not just the bond payment, it's also the interest payment. And we know interest rates are pretty high right now. So I'd rather see us saving and paying cash for as many things as we can. It has to be like our own household budget. Sometimes we have to defer things because we just can't swing it this year. And we just have to keep putting our pennies aside and hope that we can do it next year or the year after.
I was just gonna say the lights were on a lot of trucks today, and that's what we're trying to make sure we have, going. It's not just the lights in Tracy Hall, but I agree with you. We need to look at all of it. Roger, you were next.
And you need all of these trucks, including that ladder truck, right?
So
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Matt Sweat's here, so I would say, of course, we absolutely need all of these trucks. They're great. What was I gonna say? Oh, so I wasn't having a hot take earlier. I really was wondering what Brennan was thinking about in terms of prioritization. I don't know if there's any value in what I was saying about I do not want to put fossil fuel trucks that probably are deferring faster in their quality because they're outside rusting because they don't have a safe, warm place where the doors can open for them, right? So while I appreciate that, the highway department needs, a fleet and that there's expertise in that assessment, where are we on our physical plan? Like the last time that we had this conversation that we were going to think about our physical and digital spaces, we spent a year not thinking about our physical and digital spaces. So I guess how much of that needs to be talked about at all right now, I guess. To me, it's like ignoring the elephant in the room.
would it get to your point if we did put some of that surplus in a reserve fund and focused on the infrastructure? Because Brennan, you can answer the priority question. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but I think that the taxpayers are going to have some thoughts too.
But why would we? I guess my question is, why do we need to move the surplus into reserve fund? Why couldn't it just stay as surplus? Like we we would have to make a promise of delivering on something. And right now, the promise, in part because I don't have the workbook in front of me, the promise is unclear to me as to what these assets are, right? I mean, there's no better education than saying, this is it. This is everything that needs to get done. This is the book. And I don't even have it right now, right? So I saw screenshots of things and presentations, and then I have another question about fields and gazebos and other things that may not be in the capital asset plan that maybe should be.
I was just gonna offer that the surplus issue is a statutory thing, and that's why we have to worry. We can't just hang on to it. Joyce,
What statute is that? What statutory thing is that?
I'm looking it up to send you. What you don't spend, you return to the voters, and that's what we're talking about, how we hang on to it.
Right, and the other piece with that is if we earmark it to highway and paving, then it stays in that fund. So the purpose of putting money into a named fund, be it paving, bridges, whatever, it stays there as opposed to staying in the surplus fund, because the surplus fund is a moving target because every year money goes in and out of that fund based on how the town does that year. So by moving it out of the surplus fund where it's sitting right now into a named fund, then we could do that. I would recommend, though, instead of creating a new surplus fund, that you put to the voters that we put so much into the infrastructure funds that we already have.
Right.
Because Chris is already requesting 2 new funds. One of them is infrastructure because it's just really hard for him to track what are the expenses for culverts versus paving versus bridges. So he's already asking for that.
But Joyce,
So that would be part of that. But the other thing I wanted to mention that the town garage, I think, is the structure you're talking about. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yes.
Okay, so that is in the capital plan. Chris has put in $500,000 for that as he's still waiting for costing and stuff to come in. So that is in there. It's actually expensed over 4 periods. So you will see that next week. Yeah.
And so, okay, and then just as a follow-up, if I may, Joyce, you gave a presentation about sort of what is a capital asset, what's not a capital asset. If we continue to, let's say, treat our athletic fields with contracts, like contracts where they need to be maintained at a certain level, would that be considered a capital asset that we need to plan for or not? No, because it's just grass.
No, because that's just contracted ongoing work. It's
Okay.
not a physical asset that you keep because you have to keep doing it again.
Okay,
It's not, think of it like a capital asset is something you buy and then you keep it for a while and then you replace it and you do it again. So you pave a section of a road and it lasts for 10 years or 20 years and then you pave it again.
Yeah, but what about like a baseball field? Like, does that get treated like if
you're putting in a new baseball field, yes. So if you're spending money every 10 years to redo a baseball field, yes. But if you're just spending money to put the lines on every year, no, that's not a capital expense.
So then my question for Brennan, which he doesn't have to answer now, because I'm probably he'll talk to people, is do we need to treat our public spaces increasingly like athletic fields, like baseball fields? And do we need to budget accordingly would be my question. Not like their maintenance, not their painting, but like, whatever. I also don't know what's involved in maintaining a baseball field or a grass field. But anyway, that's a question. And then a gazebo, is the gazebo or any of the physical buildings on either in our forest or in our Tracy or in our the field, what is it called? I don't even know. And they're in there as well.
That's in there, yes. The bandstand,
Okay.
yeah, that's in there.
So I'll stop asking these questions. We're going to see it eventually, and then I won't.
Yeah, we're going to see them next week. Part of the presentation I'm going to give by department, because that's how I'm presenting, is I'm going to give you their section of the capital plan and what they've got in there that's earmarked to be spent over the next 5 years.
Okay.
So that you can see what that is. And cool. I can get a full list, but be honest, it's a huge workbook. So to push that out on a PDF, Mary or Priscilla, was it Mary or Priscilla? Somebody was having trouble reading stuff last week. They would never be able to read that. They wouldn't be able to see it. but it's certainly visible for people that want to stop in. We can share it that way in the department heads. But I will be presenting more of that, 5 years worth of data next week by department and the following week.
Thanks. And so then my only question that remains outstanding, and you can get to other people, is the layer of strategy and prioritization that we can expect to share with our voters as a result of our town manager sharing it with us would be what I would be looking for.
So let me try to address that quickly, Roger. So I think values are very subjective, right? So it's very hard for somebody to say, I have a handle on the values of the town of Norwich. I know you may have your values and they might be related to climate change. We might have somebody else who doesn't care that much about fossil fuel burning vehicles, but really wants to make sure that we have updated infrastructure and we have roads plowed and such. So I guess we've deferred to some level to the department heads and allowed them as the managers of their departments to prioritize what they think their needs are for this coming year and then out into the future, 10 to 20 years out. And I think you should hear from them. I can't tell you today that I could say, this is the priority of the town of Norwich and its fossil fuel burning is bad and that we should switch over our fleets to have more green, less emission vehicles. I don't know that I could say that right now, although I know there are a few that are very passionate about that and are here on the call. I will also say on that very specific thing that I think we switched to hybrid police vehicles probably 3-4 years ago. I'm not exactly sure what the timing was, probably related to a priority that we wanted to try to be more fossil fuel, cognizant of that. And what we're finding is that we're having a real problem with those vehicles because of that technology. And you've heard from Chief Romeo in the past that he's got a car in the shop, on a very regular basis, and has been hearing from the manufacturers that the reason for that is the technology for those hybrids or battery-operated emergency vehicles isn't right for the Northeast and right for the climate that we're in. So to that, that's just a very specific question to your, kind of a fuel burning emissions question. That I think to me is, I'd rather have functional equipment that we can count on for the work that's being done than to focus on kind of an aspirational thing like that.
Sure. So my question was actually, how do you as town manager plan to prioritize the capital, the CIP? But nonetheless, we don't have to answer that now.
Okay, I think Priscilla was next.
Yeah, just a couple of things to pick up on what Brennan was just saying, and also Roger about, replacing fossil fuel burning vehicles. Wade Cochran had also said to me when he was chief, the technology really isn't there for the police vehicles to be hybrid. They're just constantly requiring maintenance. It's too much strain on the batteries when you put the whole police package in. You get the computers and you get the radar and you got the lights and the sirens and the so on and so on. And so, I mean, that's a nice aspiration, but I personally agree with Brennan. I'd rather have something we can buy and it's going to last us a while and work instead of, I just don't think the technology is there yet, and it would be probably in dollar terms, you might want to argue it differently, especially Jack Cushman. Hi, Jack. In terms of what the overall costs are, but I think, it'd be better not to have them. The other thing I'm thinking about is Hemlock Road all of a sudden. I mean, that's probably going to be a bond issue. I mean, I'm guessing because we're hoping for reimbursement from FEMA on that. So, talk about life happens. That happened. We're hoping for reimbursement, but, we're talking about trying to pay for things as much as we can without going into debt. But I don't know. I just hope that turns up somewhere, maybe in the discussion next time. I'm done. I'll shut up now.
Mary Layton.
I think just in terms of the number of years where we've underfunded our reserve funds, I would be in favor of a larger infusion amount in this year and kind of front load it a little bit. So I'll just say that.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other hands from select board members, I don't know who was first, Matt or John? Jack Cushman or Matt, who's first?
It was Matt.
Okay, thank you. Matt, go ahead.
So I just wanted to add, in the past, when we've talked, when the town has addressed capital projects like the communications tower, the police and fire building, a major renovation to Tracy Hall, and the improvements to the public works garage that were done in conjunction with when we built the police and fire building. All of those projects were done by bond. And it seems like this whole thing is very multifaceted, but a lot of times capital, like the capital planning of like replacing vehicles, replacing culverts, paving, stuff like that, makes a lot of sense to use, save up in capital funds to do that. Whereas like a really three-dimensional project like renovating Tracy Hall or like building the police and fire building seems to, I don't know, be easier to wrap your mind around if you come up with a total plan and then you bond for it. And so I just wanted to add that to kind of like our toolbox here of options. It doesn't have to be that you save up for Tracy Hall. That is a very legitimate thing to come up with a really good plan and then ask the voters to bond for it.
Thank you. Good points. Jack,
Thank you so much. I know you're busy. I'll take 1 minute.
take
to
your time.
say-
You've got 3 at least.
No, 1 minute to say, first of all, we do know, as a matter of fact, that the voters overwhelmingly endorsed Article 36, which remains our guidance to move away from fossil fuels as quickly as is feasible. And we attempted to have a 5% annual reduction in fossil fuels. As the author of the Article 36 task force, I can tell you nowhere did we make any suggestions that we should rush out and buy electric fire trucks or anything else that doesn't work. What we urged the town to do was to raise climate change to top priority in setting its plans so that we can do what the science says must be done, which is to eliminate our uncontrolled use of fossil fuels. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pam?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the question of bonding. Looking at the town report that came out last year, the public safety facility bond, we pay $47,000 a year. We're paying that for 30 years. And the interest has gone from $46,474 in 2022 to $49,500 in 2024. So if you bond, you're basically paying as much in interest as you pay on the principal of the bond. That's why I'm not in favor of bonding any more than we absolutely have to. And we have to think about the debt load that we would put on the taxpayers. So while bonding might make it easy to get into a project and get it up and running, long term, it is twice as much over the cost of the term of the loan. So I'm not in favor of doing that unless we absolutely have to.
Thank you. Roger?
I know, did Joyce have to leave at 8?
Yeah, I was just gonna call it.
Okay, so I guess my question then for you to maybe ask if you want to is, does she have what she needs?
Joyce, do you have what you need?
Well, I've got a few takeaways, but I guess as we go through the next couple weeks, if there are things that you would like me to add in formulaic and or do research on, I would like to know that so I have a little bit of lead time to do that, because as you probably know by now, I'm not one to just talk off the cuff. I want to get my numbers together before I just start talking.
Mhm.
So I want to help you to present what you want to look at, but I need to know what that is other than what I'm presenting, because I know there's not things in my mind that necessarily are in your mind and vice versa. So.
Right. Thank you. Roger, another?
So Joyce, I don't, to the extent that you're involved in this work, and in like some kind of prioritization, high level prioritization would be like helpful, high, medium, low. If everything is high, then, so
In
be
the
it.
cap plan, you mean?
Yeah, I think that would be nice to see. And then my other question would be about revenue. At least one position that was budgeted had a revenue calculation attached to it, that you had done last year for us. So has the revenue delivered on that position? I guess
That was for the recreation department. That
yes,
person was never even hired.
that was never hired. And is it budgeted?
This year, no. Bree took it down to a half a position. So if you look at the slide that was in tonight's packet for the salaries, you can see that there's a big decrease in that department, and that's why. She took it down to a half position, and that eliminated benefits as well
Okay.
in retirement. So, yeah.
Okay. And then did the planner position also go down as well?
No,
No, the planning position is still in there because we're hoping we're going to hire somebody for that, I think.
Right. So
It's
that
in
was it. So I guess my question was on revenue, but I guess there's nothing to prove with revenue. I guess I would like to sort of.
No, there's not anything to prove on that because we didn't hire anybody in zoning and planning, and we didn't hire the what did we call it, interim recreation assistant or whatever that
assistant
was.
director.
Yeah, assistant director.
Okay.
Yeah, that halftime position is going to get posted here, I think, within the next couple of days. It's been being worked on as far as the job description and the kind of rethinking of how that will work best.
Fine.
Okay.
We funded it with taxpayer money for a year, but that's fine.
We did what? I'm sorry.
We funded it. People paid for a position but it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the excess now, the surplus. So, I think we don't have any consensus, I would say, about what we're going to do. And I don't know that we have any hard takeaways for you, Joyce.
Okay.
But, and if anyone disagrees with me, speak up. Pam disagrees, go ahead.
I just want to say, until I see the overall plan, the capital workbook, and see the budget line by line like we typically see it, I don't know what kind of input I could give in terms of direction or whatever. I don't have enough information at this point to really offer any suggestions of what Joyce could provide for us other than the plan, the total budget, so we can see what's going on.
But I think she was going to provide these calculations. So when you do surplus spending, the ways that you can ask the voters, or you could ask them, would you like to use this amount of surplus funds for long list of items, right? And then they're like, yeah. Or you can say, would you like to use the surplus to allocate money to these funds? And they might be like, yeah. So I mean, Pam, are you saying that you would need to know what, I think there's two approaches that I'm hearing. Like Marcia's saying, we have this surplus question, let's resolve the surplus question, which will also allow us more time internally to figure out the best ways to use it. And I think what you might be saying, you're more in favor of, I need to see a list, and then there's certain things that I'd be willing to fund with the surplus, or.
Well, typically we see the budget as it appears in the town report, and we haven't seen that yet. And, as we start looking at the capital plan and understanding priorities and what exactly people are looking for, we may rework some of those numbers that are going to reserve fund appropriations. We may increase some, we may decrease some, we may say, let's push this out a little bit. So until I see the overall plan, what I feel like is, and I'm going to date myself, but if you pull out a paper map, the front has the state of Vermont on it. Then you flip it over and it has all these little insets of the towns, right? So if we only see the back side of the map, you don't really know what Vermont looks like. And I feel like all I'm seeing is the back side of the map, all the little insets, but I don't know how it fits into the big picture.
Well, I think if it helps, the big picture is some ways determined by us. I mean, we have to sort of listen and say, Yep, we can see that there's some problems at Tracy Hall. We can also see that we've got expensive equipment out at the DPW that may need some better protection. And then I think as a collaborative force here, you know, with the help of the town manager to sort of conduct the orchestra, we can sort of figure out what the priorities are, you know, what's going to fail first, what needs. And then we can sort of say to the taxpayers, you know, we think that we should put it in this reserve fund for this. And we're not going to know, Pam, unfortunately, you know, the specifics. We're going to only know that we need to go in a certain direction and then trust that we take those steps slowly.
Right, but are we
Um,
doing the 300,000, the 500,000, or 700,000? That makes a difference in what we see in those line items, and we haven't seen the line items yet. And that's why I'm saying I need to see the whole map.
Well,
These-
I actually saw, when I looked through this, I looked at each of those pages, the slides, and I was adding up the additions and the deficits, and it came up to 1.271598. So a million, almost 3. And to my mind, that was, you know, this is what we need to just keep ourselves going here, what the departments are asking for. And the deficits were things like we've suddenly realized that the DPW needs that big new truck. So I'm concerned because it seems like there's a huge amount of money that we need to just keep going. And we simultaneously have to think about how we're going to keep our infrastructure around us. So I guess, Joyce, one thing that you said was use an existing infrastructure fund. If we were going to put some money away with the blessing of the voters for infrastructure, is that existing fund defined broadly enough to allow us some movement as we decide those flexibilities, or is it limited really more towards DPW?
You would put it into an infrastructure fund that is named for whatever that type of fund is going to be doing the work on. So an infrastructure fund for culverts, an infrastructure for bridges, a capital equipment fund to purchase new trucks, a capital equipment fund to purchase fire trucks, a capital equipment fund for Tracy Hall. So those funds are specific. I don't know that you could have a named fund that just says infrastructure when you have all these others that you do have named infrastructure. So that's something I would have to look at. For Pam's question about seeing the whole big picture, I'm working toward that. Next week when we do the department stuff, you will start seeing the budget workbook that I did last week broken out by department. So you'll see those line items and you'll see those individual amounts. You will also see that department's funds, capital funds, and the amounts that they are asking for which pieces of equipment for those capital funds. So that you'll start seeing that detail next week.
All right, that should be good. In the meantime, I found this nice thing that the VLCT put out called Reserve Funds 101. So I will send that to all of you so you can read it. It's short but informative. All right, is there any more we can do tonight? That being the case, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Pam, do we have a second?
A second.
Second by Mary.
Thank you so much, Joyce. This was like
Oh, yeah, super.
It was very good.
You're
Very
welcome.
good.
I love to do this. This is my thing.
Glad
If you
somebody
can't-
likes it. All right, I have to call the question. Priscilla,
Yes.
Roger,
yes.
Pam,
Yes.
Mary,
Yes.
Marcia, yes. We are unanimous. Good night, all, and thank you again, Joyce and Brennan. Very good.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank
good night.
Thanks,
Good
guys.
night.
Right.